So the three of us started with zero money. The day I sold the business, the financial statement, when you looked at it, it said capital, $300. We had all put in $100 on the first day, and every nickel in 37 years of operating cash and profit was based on sales. It wasn't based on capitalization. You could never do that today because nobody's going to lend you any money. You know, we started the business in an era where you could go to the corner bank and you knew the senior vice president of lending. You went to high school with your father. So you could at least have a conversation. You can't do that anymore. And we were too stupid to know that we couldn't do it in 1979. And the guy at the bank was too stupid to believe that we could.
Today, I am excited to sit down with Tim O'Neill, co-founder of Greenwood Emergency Vehicles in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Back in the late 1970s, fire departments across New England faced a persistent problem. Manufacturers were great at building fire trucks, but terrible at servicing them, especially during the warranty period. So Tim and his partners saw the gap, stepped in, and Greenwood was born. What started as a service-focused operation quickly expanded into sales and service for new fire trucks. And for E1, I believe is the name of the organization, the emerging manufacturer out of Ocala, Florida. So as E1 grew from a young startup in 1974 to the top fire truck producer in the country, Greenwood grew right alongside of them, becoming one of E1's largest distributors in the nation over the past 45 years. Greenwood has delivered more than 5,000 fire trucks and another 2,000 ambulances throughout New England. Eventually, Tim bought out his two partners in 2000 and led the company for 16 years before selling to a private equity group in 2016. And in classic entrepreneurial fashion, after about a week of sticking around the post-sale, he realized his phone wasn't ringing anymore and knew it was time to step aside and let the new team take over. So today, Tim lives in Seekonk, Massachusetts with his wife, Jean. He's a regular at Bruins and Patriots games and on a personal quest to find the world's best and still affordable California Cabernet. Tim, thank you so much, and it's an honor to be with you today.
Great to be here as well, Nick. Thank you.
You bet. So Tim and I met, for the listeners, again, I just want to welcome you to the HFA Better Way Podcast, where we unpack business stories to help you along your journey. And I met Tim at the CBEC conference, teaching advisors like myself and other professionals in the industry of how to help owners like you exit a business gracefully and profitably. And that's how we originally got connected. And I'm just excited to go through your story. I mean, the first thing I remember, I should say the thing I remember you saying when you were asked a question on that panel was, so what's the key? Like, what's the wisdom for exiting a business, having a business? And, you know, I think someone asked about family and you're like, well, don't hire family because then you never have to fire family. Right?
Very easy. Yep. No, I know so many people who have family-oriented businesses, and family and business does not mix generally. And when you throw money in there as a third thing, it really doesn't mix. And I just from day one, I told my kids, do not think you're going to come into daddy's business. Go find what you want to do. And they both did, which made it really easier when I went to sell the business because I didn't get any pushback from family members saying, well, what's, Joey or Charlie or Tommy going to do? Well, they're going to have to go out and get a job themselves. Well, they can't because they have no skills. Well, tough, and that's why you just don't bring them in the first place. But I have a friend, my best friend owns a Volvo dealership, and he runs it with his wife and their two sons. It works great because he's cultivated his kids from the time they were 5 years old to want to sell cars. So don't take 100% of what I say as true, the majority of it, but sometimes it works exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to tell you, and good for them. Good for them. It works for them. I just didn't want the potential landmines in there for me.
And I get it. It's funny you say car business. So my family was in the car business. My stepfather and mother owned a dealership for over 25 years, and my brother was in the business. And when they sold, he was a part of the deal, but it didn't sell to him because the financial risk and where the market was, and hey, this is a lot for you. So he's at a great place right now. He's running a local dealership with the opportunity to buy, I believe. But it worked. My mom and him ran the business, and my brother was in banking for 10 years and then entered in, and it worked out. It worked out really well to be around one another. But like you said, I've seen it both ways. And I know a friend of mine I was golfing with not too long ago was like, my family's in business together. and he's not in the business, but the rest of his extended family is. And it's like there's 7 of them in the business. They all work really well together, but no one gets together over the holidays.
That's perfect prescription.
Right.
We hired a marketing consultant once to come in, and we're talking about exit strategies. And one of the discussions was, how many of you have a useless brother-in-law in the parts room? And about three quarters of the room, the hands went up. And they all said, not only is he useless, we can't fire him because my wife will never speak to me again. Well, and then I'm thinking secretly, and I didn't say it out loud, well, maybe that could be a twofer. You fall into that trap. You get the unemployed brother-in-law, and it just drags the whole company down and everybody in it.
Sure. Well, it's like you said, you've got to figure out what works best for you, and then you've got to run with it and run with it with conviction. Yeah. So I guess when you look back on your journey with Greenwood Emergency Vehicles, what stands out to you as the earliest, kind of the early spark? Like, what was the early spark for the business? Like you said, you saw a need. How did you come across that?
Somebody told me once, when you're trying to figure out what your career is going to be or what your business is going to be, it's a very simple formula: find a need and fill it. And I do some guest lecturing at Dean College School of Business in Franklin, Massachusetts, and I'll go around the room and I'll say, all right, what do you want to do? Well, I want to open up a pizza parlor. And I would just shake my head. And I'd say, sorry to poke holes in your dreams, but when's the last time you couldn't get a pizza on Friday night? Well, never. Well, then we don't need any more pizza parlors. That is not going to be your salvation here. That's not going to be your career. Well, but I love cooking. Well, cook for your friends on weekends. But during the week, find something that's going to make you money. So we were, myself and my 2 partners, they're older than I am. I'm 71, one's 78 or 79 now, and one's in his mid-80s. And they were firefighters in the local fire department. And we were sitting in the firehouse one night, and one of the guys is the mechanic on the fire department, and he comes in and he's just dejected. And the other guy said, "Hey, Bob, what's the story? What's the matter? You don't look like you're in a good mood." "No, I can't get parts to fix this new truck. This new truck is broken down." And Mark said, "Well, Bob, just call the dealer, call the distributor, and have them come fix it." There are no dealers. You buy trucks directly from the factory. If something goes wrong with them, a guy comes out in a van from Elmira, New York, or Clintonville, Wisconsin, or Middleborough, Massachusetts, where they're made. And it takes them 3 or 4 weeks to get there. But until then, you can't use the fire truck. He said it would be great if we had local service, if all these manufacturers had local service centers, that you could bring the truck to. And the 3 of us just looked at each other like, yes, some people call it a holy shit moment. And we just looked at each other and said, "You mean nobody services these new trucks?" "Nope." And we said, "Well, let's do it." Now, I didn't know anything. I was in the banking industry. I didn't know anything about fire apparatus, but I had to learn pretty quick. And the other 2 guys thought they did. They learned. They knew a lot about fixing fire trucks and putting out fires, literally, but they just didn't know. They didn't have any business skills. So the 3 of us started with 0 money. The day I sold the business, the financial statement, when you looked at it, it said capital $300. We had all put in $100 on the first day that we started the company, and every nickel in 37 years that I was there, every nickel of operating cash and profit was based on sales. It wasn't based on capitalization. You could never do it today. You could never do that today because nobody's going to lend you any money. We started the business in an era where you could go to the corner bank and you knew the senior vice president of lending. He went to high school with your father. So you could at least have a conversation. You can't do that anymore. And we were too stupid to know that we couldn't do it in 1979. And the guy at the bank was too stupid to believe that we could. The first 50,000 we blew through, the next 100, and finally we had to go to the senior vice president to get a bigger line. But it took a good 5 years before our story that we had been telling was a believable story. And we started to see some results from it. But we were just too inexperienced and too naive. It was a whole different world back then. The whole world was too naive. You could actually go in and borrow money on a handshake. You had to sign something eventually, but at least you knew the guy sitting behind the desk. That's impossible now. So we're very fortunate that we did it in an age where the story, I'm able to tell the story now, 40 years later, 45 years later, because you can't do that anymore. You need to walk in with a wallet. You need to walk in with money already in your wallet.
Wow. Yeah, there's no question lending standards have changed today dramatically. You've got to give a lot in order to get even to be considered. That's fascinating.
Yeah, a relationship would take you a long way back then. It doesn't anymore. The decisions are not being made by the guy at the local bank anymore. They're being made by the guy at the home office in Charlotte or Minneapolis or Buffalo or wherever the hell the bank is.
So outside of banking, was there any other context where relationships played a really key role in the startup of the business?
Everything that happens in this world is accidental, obviously. I'd like to say that this whole thing was a result of a Harvard Business School well-executed plan that I had been working on for years and years. But it was a lie. It was all timing. It was all luck. It was all making that decision that night with the three of us sitting together, having the oh shit moment, where we were incredulous that nobody had thought before of having regionalized service centers for fire apparatus manufacturers. And what that led into was us representing E1 from Florida. We went down President's Day weekend of 1979. We flew to Gainesville, Florida, rented a car, stayed in some cheap hotel, and we were visiting this manufacturer to try to get the right to service their apparatus. And there weren't many fire trucks. E1 had just started. So we drove down the next morning with our President's Day 1979, trying to convince these people that us three schlubs were the key to their future as far as having because nobody's going to buy a fire truck without having a place to get it fixed. That just like a car. You're not going to buy a new Chevy unless there's a Chevy dealer in town or the next town. So they were so desperate that they said, okay, you're hired. We'll hire you as a service center. They knew Bob's capabilities as a mechanic. It's a crackerjack mechanic, top-notch guy. They didn't know anything about Mark and I. We just came along with a package. So they took a risk. They took a risk on us. And we said, okay, well, we can't have a service center without having a building, without mechanics and all this kind of stuff. So it just sort of set us on a path of a multi-generational, after all these years, a business model. And it not only put us in business and sat me here in front of you to be able to tell the story, but it changed the entire industry. Once they figured out that somebody in Massachusetts or New England had figured a way to service these new trucks, all these fire chiefs talked together. Their chief in Boston knows the chief in Chicago. They're best friends. And the chief in Chicago would say to his local guy, wait a minute, you don't have a service center? I'm not buying from you. They put one up in Boston. Why don't you have one here? Well, that costs a lot of money. Well, I'm spending a lot of money. So it really changed the whole business model for the entire industry nationwide, where every manufacturer now had to have a service center to fix fire trucks, or they couldn't sell any more trucks. I mean, the BS was over. The guy in the van from Elmira, New York, he's out of a job. You're spending millions and millions of dollars on fire trucks, and you deserve the support that you're spending all that money on.
Yeah, well, I mean, just you guys, like you said, you found a need and you decided to fill the need. None of us knew what we were doing other than let's just try and fill this need. So as those first few years went on, what were probably the biggest surprises, either good surprises or challenging surprises, as the company began to gain traction?
The time from being a service center to the time of selling fire trucks, where we actually would go out and call on customers and try to sell E1's fire trucks, was almost, just a couple of months, because they were desperate to have somebody sell their trucks as well. And they figured that we lucked out because we were the only ones they knew in the area that could, that he was even remotely interested in representing their product. So the biggest surprise was that we actually sold 6 trucks our first year, because I wouldn't have bought a truck from me. I just, the fire apparatus industry, the fire industry in general, is a very small business. It's a very small industry. There's only 20,000 fire departments in the whole country. So that limits to whoever wants to be in the fire truck business to 20,000 potential customers. That's not like selling underwear, where if you're in the underwear business, you got 350 million, potential customers. It's just a very, very small segment. So we sold 6. The next year we sold 12. But what was really surprising was we just couldn't keep money in our hands. Everything was so expensive. We needed everything. We had to buy everything. And the minute we made $10, we spent 20, out of necessity. They weren't bonus checks. They were checks for hiring employees, buying trucks, buying tools, all of that stuff. So very surprising how fast you could run through cash.
Yes. Can you speak to that? So for someone listening to this who is starting a business or in the early years of the business, and they're having that I am burning through cash so fast. Is this supposed to be this way? Can you just speak to that for a minute?
Yeah. Whatever you think it's going to be as far as burning through cash, it's going to be worse. You really have to have partners. This is something where if I was trying to do this myself, or if one of the other two guys was trying to do it themselves, it never would have worked. We needed 3 guarantees at the bank. They probably would have gladly accepted more. If you're undercapitalized, don't waste your time. It's just going to be certain failure. It would have been then, and it would have been now. There's nothing wrong with partners, as long as you have two things. As long as they bring something to the table, some skill or some cash. And the other thing is, and the most important thing is, there's got to be a way to get rid of them. When the time comes, nothing can be left to chance. You have to have a partnership agreement, because if you're my partner and you have a coronary at 3:00 in the morning and don't wake up the next day, I don't want to be in business with your wife. I'm sure she's a lovely lady, but I don't want to be in business with her. So there's got to be a funded buyout agreement for life and for death. And we had both of those from day one, because we all agreed we didn't want to be in business with each other's wives and kids. Right. No, and that's just smart. That's smart planning in general, whatever stage of the business you're in, whether you're at exit mode or you're right at the starting point. No, that's good. So how did the relationship with E1 begin? Talk about the genesis of that. Bob, the mechanic who was complaining about lack of parts to repair a truck, when we discussed getting into business to fix fire trucks, he said, I went to a mechanics seminar the other day at a local restaurant, and all of the fire truck mechanics from New England came. And this guy from E1 in Ocala, Florida was there, and they make aluminum fire trucks and not steel fire trucks. And we said, well, that's kind of weird. Haven't heard anything about that before. And he says, yeah, but the more you think about it, have you ever flown in a steel airplane? No, you haven't, because it would sink pretty good. It wouldn't take off well. And he said, with aluminum, there's no rust. It's lighter, lasts forever. The paint actually sticks to it. And if we're thinking of going to these manufacturers to get into a relationship to service their trucks, E1 seems to be a very progressive, cutting edge, manufacturer. Let's start there first. So we did. We started there first and never went anywhere else, because between fixing their trucks and selling their trucks, we were busy enough. Literally. So then when sales of trucks, you went into the final year of sales. So you said you sold 6 your first year. It would you say maybe 12 the second year? Yep. How many trucks were you selling on average as you reached the eventual sale? About 100 a year between fire trucks and ambulances. And that was 9 years ago. And now they're up to about 200. So the fire truck market, there were really only about a half a dozen fire truck manufacturers that were worth anything. The little mom and pops, which we became a mom and pop, actually. We made these little trucks, one-of-a-kind things that nobody else would make, a couple of dozen of those a year. And we'd sell them in the Caribbean, where the roads are really small, and they needed to carry a little bit of water and a lot of foam up the side of a mountain to save this $20 million house. And we kind of specialized in those things. So we were a mom and pop. But as far as the manufacturers that would make over a couple of hundred trucks a year, maybe 5 or 6 of them altogether. And again, about 5,000 fire trucks a year in the North American market. And North America means the U.S. and Canada, not Mexico. So if you look at that and do the math, when you add up all the states and provinces, it's about 90 per state in Canadian province. That's not many. So the only way you're going to gain market share in any particular state is to sell as close to 90 trucks a year as possible. And that's about it. The market might go to 5,200, it might go to 4,800, but it's always around 5,000. So you grow your company and grow your market share by getting as much of that 5,000 truck base as possible. And again, not exactly a Harvard Business School plan, because they would have complicated that a lot more. So it's just the simple truth.
Now, were you the one out doing most of the selling?
I was. We had three different skill sets. So with the mechanic, me from a sales background, and Mark, the fireman. He was a captain in the local fire department who had organizational skills. And he said, you guys, you go out and get the service business, you get the sales business. I'll stick around here and figure out what to do with it when you bring it in. And we agreed early on that we would never go home mad at each other. I think that was why we lasted as well. Three distinct, unique personalities, and we just we argued a lot, as distinct and unique personalities tend to do. But we never went home mad at each other. We came in mad at each other, but never went home mad at each other.
So whatever dissipated when you left was brewing until first thing in the morning, maybe.
Pretty much. We just zipped our lips when we went home and said, we're not worth ruining our sleepover. We'll get back at this tomorrow.
Right.
And it worked out. We did have a pretty good ability to talk things out and figure out our problems.
So the fact that each of you had separate responsibilities per se in parts of the company allowed for no one's necessarily stepping on anybody's toes with regards to where they were leading aspects of the company, right? Like you all were able to you all worked together and you worked on things together, but you were able to lead sales, he was able to lead service, the other was able to lead kind of the inner office and administrative part. Yeah,
the guy, Bob, who ran the service part of it, didn't have any organizational skills. So one day the bookkeeper comes in and says, guys, we're out of money. Well, what do you mean? We look at all this work. We got trucks backed up in the parking lot. It looks like the Atlanta airport here of fire trucks. How can we not have any money? So Mark and I go into Bob's office, and he's reading Field and Stream magazine at his desk, or Hunting Weekly or something like that. Like, Bob, we're really busy, right? He says, oh, crazy. Yeah, they're stacked up out there. Well, we don't have any cash. Well, I haven't gotten around to sending any bills out in a long time. Well, what's a long time? So he had this stack of repair orders on his desk about 1.5 feet thick, 4 months worth of repair orders that he just hadn't bothered to close. And Mark said to him, Bob, do you know what that stack of repair orders represent? It's probably $500,000. Oh, and you're sitting here reading Field and Stream magazine. Do you think you might send these out to the customers? Because you're not going home tonight until you do. But Bob had no concept of how to do any of that, none. And he figured that if he didn't do it at all, somebody else would figure it out someday and do it for him. So what did we do with Bob? Once we get to the point where we could put him in a different role, we did. He was much better served out on the shop floor, helping the mechanics with the technical stuff, than being in the office closing out repair orders. You can hire somebody to do that.
You can hire people to do that kind of stuff all day long. Yeah.
But it just wasn't Bob. So, there were some moments like that where we had to figure out what roles were we going to grow into, other than the ones we kind of self-appointed ourselves to.
Yeah, so talk about that a minute. So the roles that you had to grow into, you said all came in with a skill set. Where did you have to grow? Obviously, you know how to sell. You're not used to being in the business community. Where was the biggest area that you had to grow to continue to propel the company forward?
In the finance end of it. Sales guys are typically not good finance guys. Engineers are not good finance guys. Finance guys are not good at anything other than finance. But you have to know a little bit about everything. You have to know enough to be dangerous. I couldn't go in the later years. I couldn't go to meet with the bank without knowing some basics about our financial statements, or I'd look like an idiot. So I had to know enough to answer their questions to the point where I knew they wouldn't go any deeper than a certain level, because they didn't know either. And you switch banks every once in a while, not because you want to, because you need to. Either the bank you're with is too big or too small, and the bank you usually end up with is just right. I had to craft our story into a believable story that a bank would wrap their arms around and say, boy, I really want these guys as customers. And that includes forward projections, things that you lost money on in the past that they knew about that you didn't want to repeat. We switched banks in 37 years, I think 3 or 4 times. And which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is, because you got to train a whole new bunch of people in your business. And once a guy who had been asking for our business for years came in, and I said, look, we're finally going to make a change here. Would you like to pitch us? Yeah. And I had just bought out my 2 partners. It was the year 2000. So a week went by, 2 weeks went by. So I called the guy and I said, Steve, you've been asking me for years for my business, and I haven't heard from you now for 2 or 3 weeks. Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but we don't understand your business, and we don't understand how you're going to pay back that money that you borrowed to buy out your partners. And I said, well, let me tell you how I'm going to do that, with or without you. And it's kind of like a car dealership where you can't sell cars unless you have a parking lot full of them. Same with a fire truck business. You have to have 2 or 3 ladder trucks, 4 or 5 fire engines, 6 or 7 ambulances. Because if they hit a tree with one the night before, they want to come in and buy one and drive it home the next day. Most of it is budgeted, planned purchasing over years and years. But occasionally somebody flips one over and you got to buy one tomorrow. So I said, Steve, how we're going to do this and how I'm going to pay for it is, you see that fire engine out there? Yeah. Somebody's going to come in this afternoon and want to buy that fire engine. And he's going to give me a check. And we're going to literally paint their name on the side of it. And he's going to drive it home. And he's looking at me. And I said, that's as complicated as it gets. This is a very, very easy business. He goes, oh, no, it's not. It's way more complicated than that. And at that point, you just want to shoot yourself in the head because you're talking to somebody who either doesn't want to understand on purpose or is generally too stupid to understand in the first place. Okay. But Nick, it is that simple. You know, you see these fire trucks and all these testing machines and the tools that we have, and you think, boy, this is going to be really tough. It is a simple business unless you self-complicate it. It's literally that easy. Guy brings in a check, he gives it to you, you give him a title, and he drives the truck away. So no different than selling Buicks, to a point.
Right. Right. The floor plan just looks a little different. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Big time. Yeah. And my partners were so conservative, especially Mark, who was the president of the company. I would buy 4 ladder trucks, and at that time they were $250,000 a piece. Well, today the tires are $250,000, but the whole truck was $250,000. So I bought 4 of them, and I staggered the delivery out a couple of months apart. And I always wanted one on the lot. And he said, boy, you just ordered $1 million worth of trucks. Now, our margins were about 10%. And I said, well, you could look at it that way. You could look at it that way. Or I just made you $100,000. That's the way I prefer to look at it. And I can't make you the $100,000 without having these trucks sitting out in the parking lot. You can't forget, we both worked in the car business a long, long, long time ago. And he says, yeah, you're right. But both of those guys, being older than me and having nice conservative jobs in the fire department, were not risk takers. They just weren't. I was at the Miami Art Show last week. There's all kinds of wacky stuff that you look at. And one thing on the wall, I took a picture of immediately. And they called it art, but it's just a picture. And it's something you hang on the wall, and it says, no risk, no story. And I just had to snap it for this meeting. In addition to no risk, no story, the best time to take a risk is when you have nothing to lose. Now, so that'll lead into something later on as well. But we none of us had anything to lose. Well, I mean, I had nothing to lose. The other guys did. They had families, they had houses, they had mortgages. They never planned on the business becoming the size business and the risk that it became. And they couldn't handle that emotionally. They would come in every morning and worry that somebody was stealing a quart of oil out of the parts room. And I couldn't give a shit less. I'd go give them a case of oil if we just get them out of my misery, and so I could go out and make $100,000 that afternoon selling a fire truck. But they weren't wired that way. They just weren't wired that way. Lasted for a long time, but it got to the point where they just couldn't do it anymore.
Right. And then that conversation when they exited, was that, I imagine there was some, okay, I'm going to ignore, I'm angry now, I'm going to come in the morning and then I'll address you again. Who, like, did you really have to drag them into like, hey guys, I think I'd like to buy out because this isn't for you anymore? Did you have to drag them into that, or were they eventually like, hey man, can you just get us out of this mess? Did they make it easy on their exit with? They really
did. They really did. I had a feeling we were arguing about a lot of things that required additional investment and additional risk for the company. I was 45. They were 60. And they're looking at retirement, and I'm looking at growth to be able to fund mine. And the things are not compatible. You can't have 2 against 1 as far as wanting to grow your business, because the one is gone. The one person's not going to say, oh, okay, the only reason I'm here is not to make money myself, is to make sure you guys are comfortable in your retirement. That wasn't going to work. So if they came to me and they said, look, Mark said, look, Bob and I have been talking, it's not fair of us, because we're so conservative and in a different position in our lives, to want to hold you back. You're 45 years old. You've got a good 10 or 15 years of growth till you're our age. And we would be holding you back if we didn't want to buy into what you want to do. So that was sometime in 1978. And they said, are you interested in buying the company from it? Yes, I am. I didn't even let them finish the question. By that point, I was entrenched in this thing. I had nothing else to do. It was my business. It was theirs too. So that alternative sure as hell beat going out and starting something else on my own and seeing them ruin it by their conservativeness. They actually came to me once and said, you had a great year last year selling trucks. Could you not sell as many trucks next year? And I said, what do you say, Willis? And Mark said, well, yeah, because the more trucks you sell, the more we have to grow, the more employees we have to have, the more inventory, the more people like us, the more people want to buy it. We don't want that. And I said, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah.
So we hired a guy to value the business, an outsider. The figure that he came back with was unbelievably low. And I can tell this story because neither of these two guys are going to be watching this. It was so low. And they were looking at this at the conference table, and Mark and Bob both said, oh, that number's okay by me. That's okay by us. And I said, okay, where do I, at least let me initial something. I'm not going to sign something for a while, but until we have a deal, let me give you a letter of agreement here. If I had not have done that, it would have been a whole different story. The company probably wouldn't have lasted. We would have had knockdown, drag out fights. But, I had that was in January 2nd, 2000 was the closing date. So I had a good 16 years of running it myself. 20 or so years of running it with them and 16 of running it by myself, which put me in a position in 2016 of being able to do the private equity sale.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
No, it's neat that you guys had individual responsibilities, that you weren't tripping over each other and you could divide and conquer. And then, like you said, it got to the point where their life goals were different than yours, and they were in a different stage of life than what you were in. So you were able then they were able to see that, and then you were able to buy them out, segregate, so you can continue to focus on growth. And we've even seen that in our own business. We've had the fortunate nature of buying out a couple retiring advisor practices over the last decade, and one that was internal. And internal is like, hey, it's time, because you're kind of wanting to coast and move into a different stage of life, which is totally normal. But we've got to move away from that because we're trying to grow. So I can understand that personally. But I think that rings true across any industry.
Yeah, and a funny thing happened 16 years later. The same thing happened to me. I knew exactly how they felt 16 years later.
Right.
The other thing that led to my private equity sale, or no matter what kind of sale that anybody does, whether it's an ESOP, competitor, private equity, 99% of my financial eggs were in one basket. And you can't allow that to happen. And when you recognize it does happen, it did happen, you've got to do something about it pretty fast. Because with that kind of exposure, any one of a number of stupid mistakes can happen. Your employees can do something stupid. Your bank can fire you. You can be debanked. You can. There's a list as long as your arm of what can happen. And I couldn't leave myself and my family's total financial exposure to chance that somebody else might screw it up. So, and it would have been. People say to me, "Well, why don't you still own the business now? Why don't you just have Mark run it, the guy who's running it now, and you just go in once a week and read the Wall Street Journal?" Well, that sounds wonderful, except for the fact that my personal guarantees are all over the place. And, I had, $50 million personally guaranteed, most of it secured by inventory. So it's not,
right.
It's not actually as impressive as it sounds, but so it was all secured by stuff they could turn over for cash instantly if they had to go out of business. Again, that doesn't remove the risk of somebody doing something stupid and ruining your life. And I just could not leave myself that exposed financially. Plus, the other thing was, after 37 years, it's time. It's really time. Nobody has a job for 37 years anymore. 37 weeks, maybe, but, people are always skipping around. And, I just looked at that as a great run. I liked the problem solving part of the business at the end. The fire department comes in, what kind of truck do we buy? How much does it cost? How are we going to build it? Love fixing people's problems. The BS that resulted from that, the people problems, the HR issues. Johnny didn't say hello to Sally in the parking lot this morning, so Sally filed an HR complaint. All those crap that you read about, there's a threshold, there's a level, there's a critical max where you have to say, me being in here dealing with this every day is not good for the company. You need to have a fresh set of eyes and ears and somebody who's got a 40-year-old mentality instead of a 62-year-old mentality to deal with this crap.
Sure. Yeah. Willing to jump over more hurdles at a younger age than that person.
Exactly. You can jump higher.
Right. You got fresh legs.
Right. You're well rested.
That's great. That's really good. So going back, you mentioned about risk. So at what point do you think for you, and then maybe you can speak to owners as a whole, did you realize, like when did you actually start to think about, hey, I have a lot at risk here? Like when did that become a reality to you? Because I often experience that guys who maybe run their own real estate portfolios, their own businesses, view that as being lower risk because they're involved in it every day. So at what point did you kind of say to yourself, yeah, there's more risk here than what I'm willing to handle?
Just to clarify what I said earlier, there's a risk of one of your employees or one of your customers doing something stupid. Also a risk of me doing something stupid. And not every decision that I made was absolutely perfect, but I always tried to fix things as quickly as I could. If we made a decision at 9 in the morning and it turned out to be wrong by noontime, we could fix it by noontime. So it might be me too. I didn't have a 100% track record in decision making. So when did I start to realize that that was a factor? Probably about 10 years after I bought it from them, say 2010. Had a great growth spurt, did a couple of acquisitions, became a distributor for a company called Vorton Ambulances, which is the number one ambulance in the business, still is. I paid $300,000 for this franchise. I bought it from a guy who had it, who had died, and his wife was trying to sell it. So Mark, the conservative one, says, how much did you pay for that ambulance franchise? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. And he says, well, if you paid more than $50,000 for it, you're an idiot. He says, I said, oh, no, I didn't pay that much. And, we just walked away. Well, I paid $300,000 for it. And the payback for the $300,000 was 120 days.
Oh, wow.
I sold 8 or 9 ambulances and paid for the entire amount that I paid this guy for, to buy his dealership. But that shows you how conservative this guy was. He wouldn't have taken a $300,000 risk. And the reward today, if I look back at that from 25 years ago, the reward's in the $10 million range, that I've made simply by having that they're still cashing in on today. So I ran it myself for about 10 years, and I met my advisor, who I eventually hired, John. And funny how I met him. He was one of my best friend's son-in-law. And,
interesting.
Yeah, he was telling me the story about how his son-in-law got into this niche business, and he was an attorney and didn't like fighting the judges and the other lawyers, and went into exit planning. So I met John in 2010, I think it was, and went through the whole exercise. And he prepared a fabulous report for me with a half a dozen different exit strategy scenarios. And, this one's a no, this one's a no, this one's a no. And we get down to a couple, and the only obvious solution was a private equity sale. It's kind of a boutique private equity company, because this is something you're going to go to KKR with, or BlackRock, or, somebody like that. This was kind of almost like a family office boutique private equity little package. And he created what he called the value gap. He identified that to me. And my value gap was I needed to get about $5 million more for this business to keep up with my lifestyle, not to have to change my lifestyle than it was currently worth. So we said, look, let's go on this 5-year process here of increasing the value gap or decreasing the value gap. How are we going to do that? Well, we can do one by expanding our service business, by acquiring an ambulance company. There were 3 or 4 or 5 things, and we did all of those things. So we made that gap go away. And the eventual money that I did get for the company didn't make me change my lifestyle. And John knew that was worth the 5-year wait. And I knew it was worth a 5-year wait. I could put up with 5 years worth of bullshit for, the kind of money we were talking about. So what I didn't want to hear from John was, oh no, you need to do this today. Unless we do this today, like a used car salesman type of thing. I get a guy who's hot on this today. We need to do it because you might not ever get somebody again, that's going to give you this money. Well, he knew better. He knew better that if we built the value of the company, I could account a little better for my ad backs, which was challenging because, that's kind of a lifestyle business. He knew that he would do better 5 years from now. And he knew that I wasn't going to pork him. He knew that I was going to come back to him 5 years from now when I was ready. And not only would my reward be greater, but so would his. So, and that's good to find in an advisor, somebody who is willing to wait for their own benefit as well as yours. It wouldn't have worked the other way.
Yeah, and I got to think at what you're trying to accomplish. It's not like you said it's a quick turnover sale. You've built something that's complex. It's a simple business, but there's complexity, there's people, there's a lot more there. And I found in general working with owners that you've got to know what their timelines are and know what's in their best interest.
Yep, definitely. And I wasn't ready in 2000 because I had just bought out Mark and Bob. I wanted that 10-year run. Well, as it turns out, I needed a 15-year run, and that was fine. I was still only 62 when I sold the business. And I remember we were building a beach house. I was running the business, and I was trying to sell the business. And I told my wife, you can do all of those 3 things, but you can only do 2 out of 3 at a time. You can't do all 3 at a time, or you just want to, you want to kill yourself. So, but the most important thing is you've got to run your business as if nothing is happening. The employees can't find out. The customers can't find out. And literally, we told the employees at noontime the day we did the closing of the deal. And the name of the business didn't even change. And the guy who eventually took over was the guy who was sitting right here. So you could see when I told them I was going to sell the business, their shoulders went up like this. And I said, and Mark is going to be your CEO. And they went, and literally nothing changed, that next day when everybody came to work.
That's huge.
Yeah, because the minute the employees get wind of the fact that you're looking to sell the business, why? And the more they have the time to think about why, the more they invent their own reasons, which is totally bull. But, once their minds get to work, do all your work ahead of time. Now, a few of them knew, the finance guy knew.
Sure. You've got to involve some people in that dynamic, right? Right.
And I also told them, you're not going anywhere. The only person that's going anywhere is me.
Right. So, that's great.
Yep.
So Tim, looking back, what accomplishment or milestone in running the business would you say you're most proud of?
I think just doing it in general, taking it from giving birth to it to selling it and putting it in good hands. That whole concept, of starting it and selling it. I tell my students that I talk to at Dean College, if you want to start that pizza parlor or a lawn care company or whatever it is, software company, it sounds stupid, but the day you start it, maybe not that day, maybe a week or 2 later, you really got to start thinking about, okay, what's the end game here? I know what I want to do. I want to develop this. I want to create value. I want to have great employees. I want to have great customers. I want to make a lot of money. But it's never too early to start thinking about, what am I going to do with it when somebody either walks in the door and tells me, hey, I want to buy it from you, or the doctor calls and tells you you're sick and you better start strategically thinking about moving on with this business because you're going to have to make a trip to Disney World at some point, because you don't have forever to live. None of those things have happened to me, obviously, but it's never too early to start thinking about selling it. There's no one answer to your question. It's just since I was there so long, there are plenty of individual things to be proud of, like seeing your salespeople get the top salesperson in the country award dozens of times. You're proud of all of that, but that's all part of the big collective from beginning to end. And you can pick and choose what parts you want to be proud of that day. God, I got a million of them. We'll be here till 6 o'clock, but I hired the first female fire truck salesperson in the history of the industry. And she was the salesperson of the year throughout the entire E1 sales organization for several years in a row. And why did I hire a female salesperson? Very simple, because she could sell shit. So it's no more complicated than that. The customers loved her. The factory loved her. Yeah, I'm very proud of that, but hundreds of other equally as important things.
That's so cool. So how did you and Jean navigate the pressures of entrepreneurship as a family? Like, did you just keep her totally out of the know? Were you guys thick as thieves when it came to talking about what was going on and understanding I imagine you didn't bring all the business home to her every day, but how did you navigate the pressures that would naturally boil up inside the business when you were kind of put to it?
I tried not to bring anything home because dealing with stuff at the office was enough. You've got to be able to sleep at night without having 3 glasses of wine before you go to bed. So you've got to find a way to leave it at the office. She was a teacher when we got married. It was funny, in February of 79, President's Day weekend, when I went to E1, I had met her. The first time we met was a weekend before. And she said, so, what do you do? Right? Well, I told her I was working in a bank then and in the bad loan debt collection department. But I said, I've got this exciting thing coming up where I'm going to Ocala, Florida next weekend with a couple of my friends. And we're going to look at this fire truck company and look at the opportunity of being their service representative and starting a business to service these fire trucks. And she's looking at me like I got 2 heads. Like nobody had ever heard of anybody that did that before. And she said, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. And so she went home and told her parents that she had met this guy and who's going to be in the fire truck business. And they shook their heads. It's like, run from this guy, But she didn't give up her teaching career until like the late 80s when our 2 kids were 3 or 4 years old, and she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. So I couldn't come home and bitch and moan to her about what I went through that day because her stories were way worse. And I remember one night I came home, and I always try to be home on a Friday night because the kids had baseball or whatever on Saturdays, Little League or whatever they did. And I get home on a Friday night at midnight. I walk into the bedroom. She's half asleep. And she says, how was your trip? And I said, oh, I learned something on this trip that I never knew existed. And she says, oh, now she's had baby shit up to her elbows all week long, right? So she said, what do you mean? I said, well, when you walk into a plane and the flight attendant's there and they say hello, welcome on board. Yeah. Then you take a right-hand turn and there's 6 or 8 or 10 big seats there. And when you sit down and they give you champagne. And she goes, yeah. I said, and then there's a curtain. And you open that curtain. I found something I never knew before. And she goes, what's that? And I said, people sit back there. People actually sit back there when they fly. I said, I had no idea. And I think the alarm clock just missed my ear, by about an inch. She's like, I've been here with these 2 damn kids all week long, and you're flying first class and drinking champagne. And all I was doing was making a joke, but it proved a point. Her week was way worse than mine.
So bringing the good or the bad home wasn't really appreciated.
Yeah, but people sit back there. To this day, I still don't believe it. But,
that's great.
Especially when I was selling the business, the whole process took about 2 years. Due diligence process was the worst because it never ends. And I'd come home at night and she'd say, well, what happened today? And I would just look at her and say, when something happens that's worthy of telling you, you will be the first to know. But there's going to be weeks and months of everything happening, but nothing happening. Lots of questions, lots of answers, no changes. And when I've got my signature on that deal, you will be the first one to know. So I tried not to drag her into all the details. So I used to joke with her that she couldn't find my office if I gave her a roadmap because she really had no reason to go there. Now that's obviously another half truth because she did know where it was, but she knew that was my domain and the house was hers. When it came time to pick schools for the kids, I had no input whatsoever. That was her specialty. She was a teacher for 10 or 15 years, and I wasn't going to get involved in stuff that I had no business being in, and she wasn't going to get involved in stuff that she had no business being in. So it worked out pretty well.
That's great.
Yeah.
So as you prepared Greenwood for sale, what were the top things that truly strengthened the company's value? I heard you say earlier that we had to grow the company to get to the dollar value that I wanted. Was it just buying that other dealership that kind of led there, or was there more to it?
It's all people. And by that, I mean people, employees and customers. Unless you have an employee base where if there's a sudden change of ownership or even a planned change of ownership, the next owner knows that 50% of them aren't going to leave, forget it. If there's a mutiny going on and they're all heading out the door, you've got to present a solid employee base that when they're introduced to the next owner of the company, they're going to say, "Hey, Charlie, nice to meet you, but I got an appointment with the fire chief. Can you kind of get out of my way because I got to get out of here?" And it doesn't matter to that employee that Charlie just bought the company. He's got a job to do, and he's got to feed his family. And so many different times, people would comment on me about how the average length of an employee at Greenwood was 10 years, 15 years, whatever. They loved working there. They loved the customer. They loved the product. They loved what they did. Really what myself and they all enjoyed the most was you go home at night and there's the 11 o'clock news comes on and there's a building burning and there's a ladder up to the window and the firefighters are getting people down off that ladder, whether it's at a college dorm or at a house or wherever. And you look at it and you go, Jesus, I sold that truck. And without that truck, they wouldn't have been able to rescue all of those people. So you're dealing in a product that has a tremendous amount of value to society. It saves lives and property in that order. And that's another thing that a potential buyer looked for. It's like, hey, this is fun. This is something, we're building something here that changes lives, saves families. It beats selling pizza, and I'm not dishing on pizza because I love pizza. But, if you want to go home on a Friday night and say, boy, what did I do this week? I just sold, a fire truck to the city of Boston where they rescued 50 people off a rooftop, last week. And then you go back and do it again Monday morning. It keeps you coming back. And the other thing the buyer was looking for was a good, solid customer base. If I sell the business, how many of those customers are going to leave? None. Not a one. Because they got trucks that need to get fixed. So,
Right.
A seamless transition.
So then, and what made private equity the best option for you?
Because it was the only option.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't complicate it any more than that. And ESOP didn't work. We had a couple of personnel issues where, had I stayed longer, I would have made a couple of moves with a couple of people. And I really didn't want to do an ESOP. And instead of having to move those people out, it would further cement them in a position as owners of the company. That was stupid, to do something like that. So that was not a really smart thing to do. Banks don't like to lend out a whole lot of money on those things either. They want you to sell your company for $2, and you're looking for 200 million or whatever the hell it is, because they don't want to lend any money to an ESOP either. Whether it's you or an ESOP, they hate you both. So that didn't work. An employee sale, nobody had the money. There were 3 or 4 other things we considered that just didn't work.
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, just made the most sense. So I remember in your talk up in Boston, where we met, that you still kind of kept this. Hey, I still go to the office. I have a little place where I go and I kind of set up and I read the newspaper and I check some emails and I maybe make a couple calls I have to make to check up on some things. Did that happen like within the few first months after the sale? What did the first few months after the sale look like for you and Gene?
On Monday morning, I decided to just go back to work because we really hadn't defined. All we did was close the deal on a Friday afternoon, and they sent me money. We talked nothing about what was expected of me, so I figured I'd just go to work and see what happened. And I wasn't president anymore. Mark in the next office, who was my VP of Sales and Marketing, he was president. And people continued to walk into my office with questions. And I said, no. This is no longer Stupid Question Central. That's next door.
That's the president's office. That's the president's office. Stupid Question Central.
Right. Did I forget to take the sign off my door? Because I'm going to go do that right now. I'm taking that off. I'm peeling the little sticker that says president off my door with my fingernails at about 8:30 that Monday morning. So they named me chairman of the board, honorary chairman of the board, or whatever the hell it was. And they kept me on the board. So I went to my first board meeting a couple of weeks later, and whenever anybody asked a question, they would look at me. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not the guy. It's this guy over here. So after that meeting, I went to the head dog that was there from the private equity company, and I said, his name was Tim as well. I said, Tim, this isn't going to work. And he says, I know. He says, you've just been here so damn long that they can't get used to somebody else making decisions. And, and I said, call me whenever you need me. So I bought an office condo right down the street, about a mile down the street, because I needed a place to go. And that's the biggest thing. You can't go from 100 miles an hour to hanging curtains. It doesn't work that way. So, and my wife knew too that I had to get out of the house. I had to have a place to go. So I had a little 3 or 4 office condo, maybe 800, 900 square feet, conference room, offices, my own bathroom. And I would just go there, and like when you do sell a business, there is a lot of closeout paperwork to do, months and months worth of stuff. And I formed like almost a little family office of that type of thing where, I'm looking for investments I'm looking to reinvest in stuff that doesn't require a whole lot of heavy lifting. I was looking to reinvest in companies pretty much like my own, weird little silly things that have a niche business. And I kept that. I didn't pay a lot of money for this place, but I kept it as a place to go. And I ended up selling it a couple of years ago because I just didn't need that money tied up in an office condo. Not that it was a lot. It's just that, why am I doing this? So a friend of mine is in the investment management business in Providence, and I called him. And he's pretty much a one-man show with a big suite of offices in one of the big tall buildings in downtown Providence. And I said, Les, do you have an office nobody's using? Because I need a place to go. He says, yeah, come on in. So I go down there, and it's right downtown, took the elevator up to the 12th floor, and I look out the window of this little 10 by 10 office that will be mine. And I'm looking right up at College Hill to Brown University. I'm looking at the State House, the Rhode Island State House. And I said, how much do you want for this place? And he goes, I don't know. What do you think? He says, I said, how about $500 a month? And he goes, that's fine with me. So that was 2 years ago. So for $500 a month, for $125 a week, I have a place to go that I can go and pay my bills, do some research on stuff that I want to potentially invest in, whatever. And he's in the estate planning business, the investment management business. He's a good friend, but I don't use him because I have a philosophy of never hire anybody that you can't fire. Never hire a friend to be your insurance agent, your doctor, your dentist, your investment guy, the guy that paints your house. Because if you do have to make a decision that's bad for him, you're going to be the asshole. And I just didn't want to be the a-hole with all of these people that I had hired to do stuff where I could have had just strictly a platonic relationship with and say, hey, Les, you're my investment guy, but you suck. You're fired. So, even when I was running the business, my friends who were in the insurance business would call me and say, hey, can I quote on your business? No, I would rather have you as a friend than my insurance man. And they understood that, but it's just kind of just the way I was. I didn't want to cross over with friends in business.
No, it sounds like a heavy conviction for you. Like you said, I think that works. You had that direction, and then there's a lot of wisdom there.
Yeah. So twice, just to wrap up on that, twice in 9 years have I gotten a call from the company asking me a question. The first call was, where is the distribution box for the sprinkler system in the front lawn? Because it seems to have all grown over, and the guy fixing the sprinklers can't find it. And I said, well, that was put in 26 years ago, so I don't remember. Okay, that's number one. And the second thing is, one of the things, as we become longer lasting friends, one of the things you're going to learn about me is I hate keys with a passion. I don't like keys because they lose keys.
You want to carry around the big thing of jangling keys.
Doesn't impress me. The more keys you have, the less impressed by you. So I like touchpad locks, and the lock in my office was the touchpad, and I could come in at 3:00 in the morning, and if I forgot my keys at home, didn't matter. I just hit in the code. The code, which I'll tell you and everybody watching this, because they can't do anything about it anyway, the code was 911 to get into my office. So my assistant calls me, Mark called me, the guy who took over, and says, the batteries and the touchpad lock have died. How do I get in? And I said, well, there's a key. There's a master key that I don't know what I did with it, but check around. He says, I've asked everybody. Nobody knows where the key is. I said, well, then you got to get a carpenter in and cut this lock out of the door and all that stuff. And it was a pain in the ass. But between the sprinkler box and the lock, those were the only two questions. So I'm in there a few months ago, and Lauren, my assistant, says to me, hey, I've got a question for you. And she opens her drawer, and she brings out a key, and she goes, what's this key for? And I said, oh, shit, that's the key from Mark's office. And she goes, uh-oh, I'm not going to say a word, because he had the carpenter in there cutting this lock out of the door. And if he ever finds out that I had the key the whole time, he's going to kill me. But when you're gone, you're gone. And I always think of, on January 20th, every 4 years, the old president goes out to the helicopter on the front of the Capitol. The only time the phone rings after that for him is for speaking engagements. Nobody cares about launching cruise missiles anymore or raising taxes or whatever. When you're gone, you're gone. You're just in the way if you can't believe that, if you don't believe that.
Right. No, that's good. That's great. So you're in retirement mode. You're in a rhythm. You're in a cadence, right? Did you ever struggle with like the identity crisis that some business owners have when they go to sell, and it's like, well, what am I doing now? And I mean, obviously, you saw a carrot at the end of the road, which was to get paid for the sale of the business. But did you ever have any of that identity crisis struggle?
To this day, I'm not used to not working the way that I did. It never goes away. Some people will say, oh, I went and played golf the next day with my buddies. Then we went out to dinner. Then we went to Portugal. Then we went to Rome. And well, that's all wonderful. But you never lose the feeling of, okay, what am I going to do today? How am I going to make the business better? What am I going to, and then you go, oh shit, I don't have a business anymore. But you're still thinking. And that's one of the reasons you have to keep away from the business. I go back once or twice a year to have an open house or to see an old customer friend or whoever. They'll call me and say, hey, the chief from, someplace in Connecticut's here. He wants to see you if you're around. Yeah, I'll be right over. It's a half hour up the street. So I'll do that. And I walk in and I just have to zip my lip because I walked in one day and the bathroom's filthy. And I said, you know what? It's like you get on an airplane and you put the tray table down, and it's all jelly and jam and peanut butter from the kid that sat there last time. And you're thinking, if this airline can't clean the tray tables, what's that say for their engine maintenance? And the bathroom at an office is exactly the same thing. You walk into a bathroom and it's dirty. It's like, that means these guys don't give a shit about anything, literally. The most important person in that company is the janitor. It can live without me, certainly live without you. But it cannot live without the guy creating the impression of a clean, well-run, looked-after enterprise. And you have to be dedicated to that. And I called Mark, so I said, I want to know that bathroom. And I thought this was worse than COVID. I felt that I had to put on a proximity suit or something like that. And it's all from these fire department mechanics coming in with grease all over them. And he says, yeah, it's so hard to keep clean. Well, no kidding. That's why we have a guy doing it full time. That guy over there smoking a cigarette by the dumpster. That's the guy who's supposed to be cleaning the bathroom. So you just never lose that. You just kind of handle it differently. But then you kind of mellow into, do I really want to be worrying about the bathrooms and having personal responsibility for the bathrooms? No, I don't. I really don't. I'm over that. But I'm worried that you don't see it. I'm concerned with the fact that you don't see what I see, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. No, they don't get me wrong. They do a great job. Once I identify something and embarrass them and shame them, they're right on it. But then you don't want to do that too much, because when they see you coming, they're going to head out the back door. So you got to know when to just zip it. But identity crisis, not really. I used to, even to this day, I'll say, hey, you may remember me. I used to be somebody important. And of course they'll say, "Oh, you're still important. You still are idle," or something like that.
And you would help them dust their nose off after that comment, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. But, it's a tough way to answer the question with a non-answer, but you never lose it. But there's not a whole lot you can do about it anymore.
Right. It sounds like you've done a good job of just kind of working into the next chapter. Like, hey, I'm going to do me and keep going and keep being valuable in the area of life that I'm in now, and just not slow down.
No, I told you my favorite thing that I negotiated out of the deal was the rights to use the dumpster. To anybody out there watching this, there's nothing that can stand between a man and his dumpster. And for 37 years, I would grab whatever junk and crap I had in the garage and throw it in the dumpster. So I'm gone for about a week, and I look in this crap in the garage. Well, what do I do with it? So I called Mark and I said, "Hey, I'm the guy that gave birth to you and put you in this role here, and to thank me appropriately, I only want one thing." And he goes, "What's that?" I said, "I want to use your dumpster once every couple of weeks." And he goes, "Oh, of course, So whenever you think something's not important, it's more important than you think.
That's great. So looking at this, and thanks so much for your feedback today. This has been great. And how you've gone about answering the questions. Lots of character, lots of fun stories. It makes it great for the listeners. So couple, like maybe 4 or 5 questions here, and then I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. What for owners currently in the grind of growing a company, what encouragement would you offer?
If you pay attention to everything, you will be rewarded for your attention. Because if you don't pay attention to everything, and you say, "This can slide, I'll take care of this next week," this really doesn't matter. Everything matters. Everything matters. And even on the stuff that you delegate that matters to you, to have somebody else to do, you've got to check. Reagan said, "Trust but verify," and that's the biggest thing. You have to set the vision, set the systems in place, set the clock ticking, and just watch it all the time. One of the things that I used to do was, unannounced, I would go to the bookkeeping department and say, "Whatever checks you have going out today, I will sign." So, and there might be 200 checks that day. It might be 20 checks that day. She would put them all on the table with a blank check, and I would, "Okay, what's this, what's this, what's this?" And I would sign them. And she'd say, "When do you want to do this again?" "Well, I don't know, I'll let you know." But I just wanted to see the money that we're sending out, where was it going? And so many people go, "Oh, Shirley takes care of that. Charlie does this, Charlie does that." Well, I'm sure he does. But you've got to trust but verify on that kind of stuff. And if you do those small things, you won't have those major surprises down the road. Where I'm signing this check once, and it says $495, an annual subscription to the Yellow Pages. And this is only like 10 years ago. There's no more Yellow Pages. Like, Gail, what's this? "Oh, we always do that. We always do that every year." And just ripped it up, and it says it ends today. Those are the things you have to catch. And your original question was about encouragement. I encourage you to do stuff like that, because if you do stuff like that, people will not pick your pocket as much, and you will save more of your own money. So I encourage you to pay attention to the small stuff, like the bathroom. If you walk into your bathroom and you're disgusted by it, imagine what the customer feels. You've got to hire the right people. If you take care of personnel issues immediately, I encourage you to do that, because by doing that, you are going to see better results with the next person. You are going to hire somebody better than that slug you just fired. So the encouragement is, if you do things quickly and correctly. You don't need to be Harvard or Yale or Columbia educated to find out that you should not be spending $500 for an ad in the Yellow Pages. So this is not hard. This is not hard stuff.
It's not rocket science, right?
It is not.
Right. What do you believe are the top 3 things owners should start doing right now if they plan to sell?
Well, first of all, hire somebody that knows what the hell they're doing. I could not have navigated this without John. There's no way. If you could see his initial report to me, it had to be 30 or 40 pages. He went into everything from, am I ready? Well, first of all, identifying the business, the stage the business is in. Is it a growth stage, a mature stage, or an old stage? What are my goals for the business, whether I'm there or whether I'm not there? Right down to the very end of it being the taxes. I always said my most important source of profitability was tax planning, because without proper tax planning, you're giving up 30% of your, or more of your income, and you might not need to. It's better to do tax planning and keep that money. And that's how he ended. That's how he ended his original presentation to me. The top three things is hire that person. That person you trust, the person who's willing to wait 5 years for a better deal for you and them. The other thing I would say, do it in complete silence. Consultation with your wife, your attorney, your accountant, your advisor. And that's it until you get that proposal and you can digest that and start yourself off in a certain direction. Then you've got to bring people in. Then you've got to bring a select bunch of people in from inside, those you can trust. They're not going to be happy because they have a certain comfort level with you. They're already worried about having a certain comfort level with the next guy or girl. And they want to worry about themselves, as they should. So, and the third thing, you can't have 3 glasses of wine before you go to bed. You've got to find a way. This is a very, very stressful process. You've got to find a way to leave it in the bathtub every night when you go home. Because if you're up thinking about this all day long, you're going to be making a lot of bad business decisions. You've got to run your business the way you always did. And this big major transaction, the biggest transaction of your entire life, is going to be parked over here 99% of the time and dragged over when you need to work on it. It can't be on your back the whole day. You've got to leave it until you need it. And the other thing is you can't tell any of your friends. If you're at the bar at the golf club and say, hey, how's business? The worst thing you can do is say, oh, I'm thinking of selling it. Because that guy you're telling that to lives next door to the guy who works in your paint shop. And what's he going to do? Hey, don't tell anything, but Tim told me he's looking to sell it. What? Tell nobody outside of that very, very small inner circle.
Smart advice. What mistakes do you see entrepreneurs make in preparing or not preparing for an exit?
The biggest mistake is they never think about it. They just think that they think that an angel is going to appear someday and walk in the front door with a check. And they're not thinking about it because, number one, they're growing the business, they're running the business. That takes up all of their time. But one of the benefits about being a president or a CEO is that you delegate everything. And about the only thing I was personally responsible for was ensuring that the company had a good banking relationship. Because without a banking relationship, there is no company. And the only one who's gonna guarantee those notes is me. It's not the guy in the paint shop, and it's not the janitor. So I'm presenting a working model to all of my employees, saying, "Look, we got a bank, we got customers, we got employees. Here's the mission. Get it done. Call me if you need me," type of thing. So they don't think about it because they're all busy. They're in the weeds too much. Being the president means that you shouldn't have to worry about who turned out the lights tonight. Now, if you drive by Route 95 and you see the lights are still on at 3 o'clock in the morning, yeah, you have the conversation about the person who's supposed to turn off the lights. But that's not your job. Your job is to make sure that the company can function pretty much without you. Once you set the direction, and people get caught in the weeds. They see a load of dirty dishes in the kitchen and they want to do the dishes. No, I'm not doing the dishes. That person's doing the dishes over there. He's getting paid to do it.
Right.
So I'm not.
Yeah, and you got to pay attention first that this eventually has to come to fruition. You have to start planning for it. And then that also that you can't insert yourself into parts of the business that you're not meant to be in, that aren't an effective use of your time.
Nope.
Yeah. So if you could go back and speak to your 35-year-old self, what would you tell him about business, life, leadership?
Well, there is nothing more satisfying than having your own shingle, your own business, whether you're a lawyer, an accountant, a fire truck distributor, pizza parlor guy, whatever. That is it's very satisfying to control your own destiny, generally. But the amount of people that are involved in you controlling your own destiny have to be cultivated and nurtured, and they have to buy into your program. They have to be willing to be led. They have to believe in you. They have to believe in the product. They have to believe in the customers. They have to believe in you. And unless they do that, forget it. You got to put your arms around these people once in a while. Bill Belichick was a hated coach because he couldn't give a shit about those players. He really didn't. He wouldn't even look him in the eye. Mike Vrabel, the new guy, he's high-fiving them and tapping them on the butt and, telling them what a great job they did. He's a coach's coach. Belichick was just an idiot. And in the past 3 or 4 years, it was proven that, when your luck runs out, your luck runs out. Doesn't matter whether you're Bill or Jesus. You've got to have those people believe in the coach. And me, you, whoever the coach is. They've got to know that you're interested. They've got to know that you care. Because they can sense very, very quickly if you don't care. They know, and they will start. If you don't care, they will start behaving like you. It sounds stupid, but if there's a gum wrapper in the middle of the manufacturing shop floor, you've got to stop. You got to pick it up and put it in your pocket and throw it out. And because people are watching you do that, people are watching you all the time. They watch what you do. They hear what you say. They watch your movements. They see what you do, and they tend to duplicate that. So my 35-year-old self didn't really understand that back then, but it does now. And then the quicker you understand that, don't be naive and say they're going to do that because I told them to. No, they're not going to do it because you told them to. They're going to do it because you're going to yell at them if they don't do it. At 35, you got to develop a culture where you want that to become automatic. It's where you hold the door for the customer. It's simple stuff, all the stuff you learned in kindergarten, right? And at 35, you're all full of piss and vinegar, and they're going to follow me. And if we go off a cliff, we go off a cliff. Well, if you're going off that cliff, don't look behind you because there's not going to be anybody going off that cliff with you. So if you enjoy deep drops, great, but I'm not going to be behind you if you do. But you've got to create that mentality where if this guy decides to jump off a cliff, I might just consider it because he hasn't been wrong yet.
Right.
That's kind of what I wish I knew at 35, and just instead of just saying, all right, here's what we're going to do today. Today, I would say, okay, what do you think we should do today? Get the sales force together and say, you get 8 guys in the room. All right, here's what we tried last month and it didn't work. Anybody get any ideas? And as opposed to saying, okay, you idiots, here's what we're going to do this week. And this week it's going to work. Well, they're all sitting there thinking, no, it ain't. But encourage that collaboration is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And getting buy-in from, and what that collaboration does is it gets buy-in from the rest of the team. People feel like they can own a part of whatever it is that you're working on.
Yep.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Unfortunately, in life, too many lessons are learned when you're not young. The older you get, the more you learn. If you could find a way to flip that, it would be very advantageous.
What character trait do you think would have to be true of someone if they were to flip that, if that was possible?
Humility. Don't be afraid to give somebody else the credit. Honestly, Nick, at the end of the run, the 37-year run, I didn't know too many customers anymore because I had just let the people who were going to be there after me develop those relationships. All my customers that I had in the 80s and 90s, they were either retiring or dead. The fire industry is not a business where you have a lot of long-term survivors. These guys would run into a building in the old days without air packs and get lung cancer and all kinds of nasty stuff. And about 15 years ago, I started saying, I don't need to go out and see the customers every day. I don't need to know these customers like they're my friends, but you do. And you need to know them because that's how I knew them, 20 years ago. But just have these people develop their own personal relationships with the customers instead of me. Now, I'd be nice to them. Don't get me wrong. I'd be nice to them, take them out for lunch, but I didn't go to their kids' birthday parties, and that's what you have to do. I've been invited to my customers' weddings, bar mitzvahs, funerals, everything. You become family members with these people. But eventually, at a certain stage in your career, you don't delegate it. You just back away from it. You just don't have as many of those relationships.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So what, if you had to offer one bit of advice to spouses or families walking alongside an entrepreneur, what would that be?
Give them a little bit of slack. Realize what the pressure is like that these people are under managing an organization of 80 people, half of whom don't like each other. They fight like kids in a sandbox. Things are breaking all the time. You've got a guy who just paid $1 million for a truck and it's got a flat tire. Cut them a little bit of slack knowing what they're going through. And they need to cut you a little bit of slack as well, knowing that you've got the term I used before, baby shit up to your elbows while daddy's out, taking a fire chief out to lunch. There are other jobs in your family that need to be done. So I think everybody's got to kind of loosen up and cut some slack. But the guy who's been on the road 6 days this week cannot come home on a Saturday afternoon and say, geez, honey, I'm going to the Bruins game tonight with the boys. No, that doesn't work. So it really is a two-sided equation. I would say the words of advice are both sides have to understand and both sides have to give.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. So, okay, here, Tim, rapid fire round. I got 5 questions for you. What's one leadership habit you wish more people practiced?
All right. So there are 2 answers to the question. One for me, one for the employees, because I'm the leader. I'm also leading myself. And that is, the constant focus and attention on the end goal here. What are we trying to do? What is my vision for the company? And that doesn't necessarily involve everybody else, because my vision is to run it, to make customers happy, to supply the customers a great product, to give myself an exit strategy. The leadership that the other people have to see, that the employees have to see, is somebody who totally believes in his own vision. If they think you're bullshitting them, or you don't believe in what your vision is, they're never going to follow behind you. They need to know that you believe in yourself.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. What's the most expensive lesson you learned as an owner?
Obviously, there were a lot of expensive financial ones. I always tell my kids, never bring me a problem that you can't fix by me writing a check. If I can write a check, I'm not mad at you. Always bring me something you can fix by check writing. There are different degrees of that. We had a fire chief who just didn't like this ambulance. He thought it was a lemon. I bought the ambulance back. It was $135,000. I gave him his money back. And he said, well, let me pick out another ambulance. And I said, well, Chief, I think it might be better for both of us if you go somewhere else and give him that $135,000 and try another product for a while, because we just can't seem to please you. And I like you. I want you to come back someday, but I think for where we are right now, I just want to give you your money back. And he thought our product was crap. The one he bought was 10 times worse. So he called me about a year later and he said, will you take me back? I said, of course. You never left. It was just a temporary divorce. And I wrote a check for $135,000 to get rid of this problem. And the longer you fester, the more people get paid off. They get pissed off because he's just going to get madder that he's got this truck that doesn't work. Identify the problem quickly, write a check, just no matter what it is. If something that happened shouldn't have happened, and the guy's a good customer, he's going to come back anyway, he will. But just write a check and fix the problem. Fix it with money. And, I can't imagine the number of examples I could come up with that over the course of 36 years. It's $1 million. It's got to be that I've written checks to cover for problems, but I've gotten 10 times that back in loyalty and second chances. I've had customers say to me, boy, I can't believe that you wrote that guy a check to buy his ambulance back. That's why I do business with you. So lots of money.
Best fire truck or ambulance delivery story?
I'll give you the best of the worst. A lot of these fire stations in New England have low overhead doors, short, like 10 feet, 10 and a half feet. All these new ladder trucks are 12 feet high. So it's got to be a new fire station for them to get into. So we're in Newton, Mass, and the chief shows me the station this truck is going into, and we're building a brand new truck for him. And it couldn't be over 10 feet, 6 inches high. So we did that. And we delivered the truck, we back it into the fire station, and it's about 4 inches too high, and it won't fit in the fire station. And he is mad. He's a little redheaded Irish guy, and he was on fire. And he says, "You measured this fire station, and you told me that it would fit." Well, what I had forgotten to do was consider the angle of the ramp coming up into the fire station, which boosted the back end up about 4 inches. And after he cooled down, I said, "Chief, what are we going to do?" He says, "Well, one of the guys is a carpenter. Let me see what he thinks." So I get a price of about $15,000 to modify the soffit of the door and raise it about 6 inches, and the truck fit in. So it just goes to show you, despite the best planning you could possibly do, sometimes you make mistakes. That was 30 years ago, and sometimes he's still buying trucks from us. Well, that fire department is still buying trucks from us today. And if I had looked at it and said, "Well, what are you looking at me for? Mistakes happen. See you later," he would have repeated that story 1,000 times. But it was the best $15,000 I ever spent to fix the door, and and life goes on. But there's a million stories just like that where you go, oh, what are we going to do now?
And you went above and beyond to make it work, and you not only retained a client, the company has pretty much a lifelong customer.
Yeah. So there's another story of I delivered a truck in Underhill, Vermont, which is in the middle of lumber country, east of Burlington, about 30 miles. You have to take a helicopter to get to Underhill, Vermont, to get to this lumber yard where the fire station is. So we went through the woods with this truck, and the guy who was the head of the truck committee said, "Oh, there's a few things wrong with this truck. I don't want to pay you until they're fixed." Now, they were all nickel and dime things that they could have fixed themselves, straightening out a gauge on the pump handle or something like that. All legitimate stuff, but he was just being unreasonable. And I said, "If you think I drove through the woods all the way up here for 6 hours not to get paid, you got another thing coming. Because I know that unless I leave with this check, you're never paying me." And one of the firemen came over to me and said, "Don't leave without the check, because you'll never get it." So we always get paid on delivery. Never delivered a truck without a check. So I got in the truck and I started driving back to North Attleboro, and 6 hours through the woods of Vermont. And about halfway down the forest, I see this truck chasing me with the lights on, and it was the chief, and he had the check in his hand. He says, I just had to call your bluff to see if you really would drive this truck home without getting paid." He said, once you've proven me that you're a stand-up guy and you do what you say you're going to do, here's the money. So, a million examples like that.
Yeah, that's great. Current favorite affordable California Cabernet?
I got a few. There's actually, I don't want to change the whole theme of the presentation here, but I'm doing it from inside the wine cellar.
You should have had that as the backdrop the whole time.
Yeah, I probably should have introduced the wine before now, but actually a friend of mine, Marco Guido is his name. Now that sounds like a made up mafia state name, but he bought this vineyard. He bought a small vineyard about a year ago, and he came out with his first vineyard, Bon Guido Cabernet, and I'm bringing it to my son's house for Christmas. And it's probably $50 or $60 a bottle. So I think this is kind of the leader in the clubhouse now for the best and most affordable. There's a lot of expensive stuff out there, and I learned early on that $1,000 bottle of wine is not 10 times better than a $100 bottle of wine.
Right.
It just isn't.
Right. Good call.
Don't believe anybody who says it is.
What is one thing that you are grateful for today?
My wife and I are still here. She has got, I don't know if I was telling you at John's meeting in Boston, but she's had some health issues that have sort of put a crimp in our travel. We're going to be doing a lot more traveling than we currently are. She can't fly anymore. But we have found ways to adapt, like she's in not a wheelchair, but a transport chair. And any restaurant around here is handicap accessible. We have tons and tons of options. So we've kind of come to terms with the fact that she can't get on an airplane, but there's still plenty of stuff to do. She's been to every Patriots game this year, except the two night games, which even I won't go to. And the are probably the most warmest and welcoming to handicapped people of any sports team I've ever seen. So we're still able to do things. And we've adapted to the fact that we just can't do everything we had planned on doing. But we're very thankful. We're both very thankful that we still have a normal life.
That's great. That's great. If you could leave the business owning community with one final thought about building something worthwhile and then letting it go, what would it be?
Start thinking about it early. Start thinking about what you want to do in its infancy. What interests you? What kind of a business do you want to build? Something that's going to definitely do something for the good of society. That's up for you to, I'm not here to preach about that. That's something for you to determine. And don't stick around too long, because you lose your edge. You can't, no matter what profession, whether you're a priest or a dentist or an undertaker or whatever, you reach a critical max at some point. And you've got to be very self-aware of, if you're not there, when do you think you'll be there? Do you think you'll be there in 5 years? Well, I knew I'd be there in 5 years. So that was kind of my window from hiring John to completion of sale. You can't wait too long. Once you've defined what it is you want to do, you've done your absolute best to build that business. Make sure that a takeover by a buyer would be easy without disrupting your customers or your employees. Identify what that is, when it is, and execute it, and don't be afraid to do that. There is a life after your business. There really is. I guarantee you. You'll not go into a gopher hole and have to hibernate and never be seen from again. The business can run without you, and in my case, I think the business in a lot of areas is running better without me, because the guy that I left in charge, who they appointed to replace me, was in his late 40s, and he's got that snap that I didn't have anymore. Once the focus is more about preserving your assets and not blowing up your business and ruining your retirement, then it's time. Once you start thinking more about yourself than the business, it's time to have somebody else run that business. And there's nothing wrong with getting a check. There really isn't. I know so many businesses, I know so many people in my industry that I was asking one of them once, he's a distributor in Maryland, and I said, Pete, what's your succession plan? He says, well, I want my son to take it over. I said, oh, great. How old is your son? And he said, 6. I said, do you know what he's going to do when he's 26? He's going to be surfing in California, because he's going to be a spoiled little rich kid because you're making him one. And he's not going to want your business. Just because that's what you want that's not what's best for the business. A 6-year-old son is not your exit strategy. But he thought it was. He thought it was because he was thinking emotionally. His grandfather left it to his father left it to him, and he didn't want his kid to screw up the 4th generation. Well, he's lucky he got 3. It's a miracle he got 3. The kid could be, kid could end up in a crack house somewhere. Who the hell knows? You just don't know. But that you'll know when it becomes that 5-year window. Yeah, you'll know.
No, that's great. Tim, thanks so much for today. Thanks for everyone for listening and joining in on the HFA Better Way podcast, helping you make better business decisions in your life. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Nick.